I think that Gorbachev ended this kind of system that wasn't working, but people pretended that it worked. Unfortunately, the people who came after him did not capitalize on the opportunity they had to build a better society and, in fact, more of a democracy. And so we're suffering with the consequences today.
Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, herzlich willkommen zu dieser Ausgabe unserer Zeitgespräche, die wir heute auf Englisch halten werden, und ich werde Ihnen dann gleich sagen, warum. Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to this edition of the Zeitgespräche, the format of the Austrian Social Democratic Educational Organization. Here in the Viennese Urania, the heart or the flagship of the popular education system in Austria and especially in Vienna. Einstein and Freud taught here. Today my guest is one of the most famous political lawyers, journalist and media expert of the United States of America. A very warm welcome to Dr. Harvey Dzodin. Thank you very much for your coming.
Thanks for your invitation. I'm honored to be here.
Yes, it's an honor for us. Mr. Dr. Dzodin, actually, we heard about the death of Mikhail Gorbachev. It's a very actual topic. What do you think of his historical role?
Obviously, depending on where people sit, they have different perspectives of him. As an American, I think he was a great man. I think in some ways, he was like the president that I worked with, Jimmy Carter, because I think he had a strong moral compass, and I also think he was honest and tried to do the best for his country as President Carter tried to do for my country. And I think that Gorbachev ended this kind of system that wasn't working, but people pretended that it worked. Unfortunately, the people who came after him did not capitalize on the opportunity they had to build a better society and, in fact, more of a democracy. And so we're suffering with the consequences today.
He was like Jimmy Carter, a man of disarmament and detente policy.
Right, and also I think in another respect, people often ask me about Jimmy Carter and was he a great president? He was not a great president, but he's maybe our greatest ex-president. Like Jimmy Carter, who started the Jimmy Carter Center and Habitat for Humanities, Gorbachev started a think tank. And tried to do a lot of work to bring the world together. Unfortunately, his work needs to be reinforced now and carried on by others.
You named Jimmy Carter, so I want to report a little bit about your curriculum. Mr. Dzodin, you have born in Detroit in Michigan, the capital of the motor, the traditional capital of the motor industries at that time. You have made the bachelor at the Michigan State University, the Dr. Juris at the world-famous Harvard University, and later the Master of Laws at the University in London. You worked at the Supreme Court, at the United States District Court in Massachusetts, at the Supreme Court. You have been a legislation assistant to the United States House of Representatives, Attorney Office, General Counsel, Federal Trade Commission, Washington, Counsel with House Conference, Vice President of ABC, American Broadcasting Company. You lived in China for a very long time, and you are a member of a lot of boards. You lived in China for almost 2 decades, and you are a commentator of China Global Television Network, if I'm right, and a columnist of China's leading English language newspaper, China Daily,
right.
yeah, China Daily. And you was a director and vice president of ABC Television in New York from 1982 to 2004. And you have been an advisor of the 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter. And you live a long time in Vienna, and you have lived in Vienna off and on from 1970. What changes have you observed here in Vienna?
I've observed some remarkable changes in a city that has managed to preserve a lot of its tradition.
Yeah.
And I think Vienna is even stronger now because it's built on those traditions, but it's also become an even more modern 21st century metropolis.
Yeah.
I also worked at the United Nations at Vienna International Center.
It's named with Bruno Kreisky in the late 70s.
Right, and I worked there when it first opened, shortly after it first opened. And I'll tell you a little story because this will show you how much Vienna's changed. When I first came to Vienna, it was kind of a monochrome city. Everybody kind of looked alike. There were very few immigrants here. There were very few people from Africa and Asia and so on. And when I worked at the UN, starting in 1981, I noticed that. And I had a friend at London School of Economics, and her father was the head of an association called International Cooperative Alliance. It was in Grosvenor Square, one of the most expensive parts of London, and he had to move. So he went around the world looking for places to reestablish his organization, relocate. And he came to Vienna, and the people he met with said, "Please, Mr. Bottomley, don't come here." And he asked why. And they said, just after the UN opened, Vienna International Center opened, and said, "Please, Mr. Bottomley, don't come, because we've swallowed the United Nations, but we haven't digested it yet." And I think that now Vienna has digested the UN, and it's a very international city now. It's changed a lot in a relatively short time.
It's one of the hard positions of the Austrian neutrality. It's very, very necessary and very important that we have the center, one of the 4 centers of United Nations here in Vienna, and we are the only one member of the European Union which has authorities of the United Nations in their country.
Yeah, that's right. And I think actually Vienna is a very important diplomatic capital. And I believe it doesn't get its due. It's always operating a little bit in the shadow of New York and Geneva. And I think that's really unfair.
I hope we have a lot of life quality in Vienna, and in August, Vienna got the Lee Kuan Yew World Prize in Singapore. It's one of the most famous city prizes for high living standards.
And the Vienna mayor went there, I think, to accept the award.
Yes. The mayor, Michail Ludwig, was in Singapore. You have lived mostly in the US and China in recent decades. How are Vienna and Austria perceived there?
In America, it's perceived kind of in a Sound of Music way. So people know that story, beautiful country, and all that. And they also know Vienna is a very musical and cultural city. China also, but more than that. I think if you have to talk about a brand of a city or a country, Vienna and Austria have the best brand in China of any foreign country. People in China love it because it's a beautiful city, a beautiful country, it's cultured, and they like the architecture and everything about it. So this is why they even built a fake village to look like an Austrian village in China. So it's very, very well perceived. And I think the Chinese people look forward to the day when COVID is over, so they can come back here and visit in large numbers, because it's one of the top cities on their list to visit.
a little boy in Beijing asked me at my last time there where I'm from. I come from Austria, from Vienna, and said, "Do you know the golden hole in the Vienna Musikverein?" Yeah. Do you know the golden hole? As a Chinese childs, you know, know something about Austria, and they know about the
they know two things.
The golden hole in the Vienna Musikverein. Yeah?
And they know about Empress Sisi. Yeah. This is another thing they know about. But so it's very well known as a country, and your country, it's really blessed, and the city is blessed to have be held in such high regard.
And Mr. Dr. Dzodin, you are a very intensive observer of the policy in the USA. What the hell is going on the US? The 6th January last year was a very tragic day for the democratic world. How is America after Trump?
It's broken in many ways, and I worry in 2 years when there's another presidential election that either Trump, or as I call it, a Trump with a brain like Mike Pompeo or some others, will get elected, and I think that's the end of our democracy as we've known it for a long time. Anybody who knows anything about Donald Trump knows that was, as a president, completely consistent with his life as a business person, that he's a habitual liar, that he's mentally unstable, and that he's not a good person, and he's completely self-focused. And I think he's really done a lot to harm America. He didn't start this trend, but he grew it, because the trend started very much in the 1960s and 70s with the conservatives growing much more powerful till today. So we live in two different silos, basically, in America. It's really a shame.
And that's how the social contrasts you can identify there.
I think the contrast is that you have right wing and left wing, or we call it red and blue states. And so it's a battle. One side believes in helping people, and the other side believes in people succeeding or failing on their own. So it's very much a work in progress. I'm biased. I'm a Democrat. I worked for a Democratic president, and I think my side is better. But at the moment, the country is extremely divided, and this is a problem that there could be a kind of civil war, a fighting civil war. There's already a civil war without fighting.
How is it possible to stabilize democracy, especially in the Republican Party?
I think it'll be possible if in the congressional elections in November that the Democrats can retain control of both houses of Congress. It's going to be difficult because traditionally the party outside the White House picks up a lot of seats in the off election, in the midterm election as we call it. But this year, recently actually, the Democrats have done a lot of good things and tried to pick up the pieces that Trump has scattered on the ground. So there's a small chance that the Democrats can take control and can build on the record that they've started, especially in the last few months of progress. But if a Republican gets in, or even if a Republican gets to control one or both houses of Congress, this is more than the beginning of the end.
The midterm elections are very important in the USA. No?
Right. They're important, but unfortunately in America, they're not fair. The reason is we have something called gerrymandering. It's an old term named after an early governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. But it basically means that the congressional districts and legislative districts are drawn not fairly to represent the population, but to exclude populations or to build up one population over another. So this skews the democracy. And then we also, in the presidential elections, we have this 18th century system of the Electoral College, which means that it's not one person, one vote. So the country has a lot of problems, but because the congressional action and because constitutional action requires so much of a supermajority, this is never going to be changed in the near future.
Joe Biden presented a large infrastructure package, and the education package enforced. Can he be successful with it? In the perspective of the midterm elections?
I think that this is going to help him because he was able to achieve some of what he proposed, and that people know that this was stopped basically by 1 or 2 senators. And so I believe if the Democrats get in again, and I think what Biden's done recently will help him. If Democrats can get in, they can build on that. But even if they don't get in, the legislation that was passed, it's very important because it does help America on a number of different levels, both in terms of manufacturing, in terms of education, in terms of health care. So it's a beginning, but not the beginning that he had hoped to see, or that people in my persuasion had hoped to see. But as they say, politics is the art of the possible. Let's
look forward with optimistic views. Mr. Dr. Dzodin, we have war in the Ukraine. We have a very strong and very explosive situation in the world. How do you assess the current situation in the war in Ukraine? Do you see any chances for peace negotiations?
I don't see any chances in the near term, or maybe in the middle term, because I think that President Putin plays hardball. He's not doing so well at the moment. He's now recruiting more people to his military. His military that was once feared has had a trial now and didn't pass the trial yet. My biggest worry, though, Professor, is that Putin will become frustrated and will use nuclear weapons. Because Putin has talked about this increasingly in the last months, and I think even talking about it breaks a taboo. And now that the Ukrainian government is distributing iodine tablets to people, they're actually anticipating something. And I worry about that because it will break a further boundary and could set off World War III. And Einstein, who taught in this institution, once was asked, Professor Einstein, what weapons are going to be used in World War III? And he said, I don't know. But he said, I do know in World War IV, it will be fought with sticks and stones. And this is what I worry about.
But on the fact of the overkill capacity of nuclear weapons, we cannot think about a war with nuclear weapons.
But we have to think about it because it's a possibility. And I think back to those days when I was a young guy, and we practiced these drills. There were worthless drills in the school under the desk. And then we had air raid shelters and things. And I remember the Cuban Missile Crisis very well. We have to think that this is possible, but it will be the end of civilization.
You have been one of the advisors of President Jimmy Carter. President Jimmy Carter, as president and as ex-president, was a man of the peace, of contributions, of negotiations. He takes a lot of initiatives for peace in the world. With your when you recollections see and observations at your time in Jimmy Carter's administration, how can you see the actual problems there?
I wish we had Jimmy Carter as an active person. Thank God he's still alive at 98, which is amazing, especially after having a brain tumor. But I think his time was a time of great hope. And he tried to and made significant strides, for example, in the Middle East in trying to broker a peace, which still isn't achieved today. He tried to move race relations forward in America, and after he left the presidency, he tried through the Carter Center to to build bridges. And I think we have to think of his example, we have to think of Gorbachev's example of people who want to be bridge builders, because we need bridge builders. We can't have separate silos. We need to be talking, communicating with each other.
Do you see bridge builders in the United States and in Europe? Perhaps former presidents, prime ministers, etc.?
I think we need to do more. And I think even more than in Europe, I think we have to do more with China. I'll tell you why. We had these structured meetings.
Could China be a bridge builder?
It could be, but it probably would be more likely for the EU to be a bridge builder. Because the EU is very much trying to pursue, or should be trying to pursue, a strategic independence from both China and the United States. So far, they seem to be pursuing the United States, which is not at all bad, but I think that they have a role to play to be a go-between and also an honest broker. So far, not. But with China, I think we're not communicating with America. China's not communicating with America anymore. We used to have structured situations where we had meetings with very high-level meetings where we could solve a lot of problems. But I think our governments barely talk to each other.
Could China be a winner of this conflict? Economically winner?
In many ways, I think China's already the winner of the economic conflict because by PPP, purchasing parity power, China's economy is the biggest in the world. But I don't think we should be working or looking at winners and losers. We should be looking at partners. So in about 10 years ago, President Xi Jinping proposed to President Obama a new model of great power relations. And so it means that more than one country can be top or number one. And I think that's where we have to go. So I can see a tripolar world with the EU in the middle, with the US and China. I don't see it foreseeable in the next year or two.
That's a very clear picture. Dr. Dzodin, let's talk a little bit about China. You lived in China for most of this century and first visited there, I noticed, in 1988. What are some of your observations about China?
In 1988, China was an incredibly poor country. It's not so poor anymore. So I believe every system of government has trade-offs. China calls itself a democracy. It's different than a democracy here or America. You may not consider it a democracy, but you have to say, if you could look at it objectively, that it's moved light years from 1949 or from 1988 when I went there. And you just have to look at objective facts. In 1953, the year of China's first 5-year plan, the per capita income in China was $54 US. Today it's approaching 12,000. That's with a population of 1.4 billion people. And there's other statistics. And one that happened recently impressed me as well. Around that time in the 1950s, the life expectancy at birth in China was 35 years. 35. In America, it was 68. Now, fast forward to today, that America has just lost 3 years of life expectancy because of the way Trump handled COVID. So the Chinese are actually ahead of life expectancy at birth than ahead of America. And also, the most remarkable fact for me is that China has eliminated extreme poverty in the last 40 years. So everybody now in China is out of extreme poverty. And with so many people, this is a remarkable achievement.
You have written a lot of Deng Xiaoping. Is Deng the architecture of the modern China?
Of the physical architecture? Okay, it's a blend of old and new. Some of it's not bad, some of it is bad, and some of it's very good. But if you're an architect, I can tell you China is the best place to be because in a place like New York or Vienna, maybe you start by designing windows or something, and maybe 30 or 40 years later, you can design a building. But in China, they don't have enough architects yet. So you get the building, you get the project.
The architect for the economic development, Deng Xiaoping.
Yeah, okay. Yeah? For the economic development, okay, China's facing a lot of headwinds now because of COVID and the way they've chosen to handle it. But I think generally the historic record up until recently has been very, very good. And I think China does this by using what they call this full process democracy. And it has several components. The first component is 5-year plans. We always think of 5-year plans from the Soviet Union as being this kind of window dressing thing. But they actually use it for targets. And also the second component of it is that they have a very good program of human development for their leaders. And so somebody like Trump could never be elected dog catcher in the smallest village where they do have direct elections, because the people who are the leaders there go through a process, and if they can't pass at a certain level, that's it. In America, we have something called the Peter Principle, where people can exceed their level of competence. This would usually never happen in China, Professor.
You told now about the headwinds. China faces a lot of headwinds now. And so is my question, China is demonized in the West together with Russia. Is the characterization fair?
I don't think it's fair. I think the characterization of Vladimir Putin's Russia is quite fair. I think he invaded a sovereign country and is fighting an unnecessary war. China's not perfect, but it's not seeming to pick a fight with another place, at least first. It has areas of friction like the South China Sea and like Taiwan, but economically the main problem is that COVID has shut down a lot of the country, and then also they've chosen the zero tolerance policy to fight it. And that policy worked well for 2 years, but now it's coming back and it's not working. So it remains to be seen if they're going to change the policy, and if so, when. And
is the Joe Biden's democracies versus the autocracies dichotomy, is it reasonable?
You know, Biden looks at this continuum of democracies and autocracies. And I think it's unfair to say America is a complete democracy and China is a complete dictatorship. Because democracies come in all shapes and form. But I can tell you that in America, there's many disparities that the country and the democracy hasn't been able to solve, and the unfairnesses like the gerrymandering and so on. And so I think if you look at results now, America is broken, China's challenged, but it's working. And I also think China will evolve, all countries evolve, but this is how I compare the two.
We read a lot of China in the last weeks and months. Is a theoretic question, is a war between USA and China, is it thinkable?
It's thinkable, yes, unfortunately. Part of it comes, I think, from America being a strong country. And part of it is that some of the interests, not only economic but political, overlap, and it comes especially in Taiwan and South China Sea. So this is a big problem. That's why having the strategic and economic dialogues that we did started with President Bush and then continued with President Obama and discontinued with President Trump need to be restarted. And I can tell you, it is possible. So we need to maintain communication. And the one historical fact that worries me, Professor, is that a Harvard professor has a theory, and that is when a rising power challenges an established power, more often than not, they go to war. And you have this exact same situation with China. So I think this is part of what's driving America.
Power theory,
So I'm worried.
What was the deeper meaning of the trip of Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan?
I think because she's a very strong Democrat, she wanted to espouse and announce democratic values and contrast them with how she sees China. I think her visit was a mistake, but a friend of mine who was Assistant Secretary of State for Asian and Pacific Affairs under President Trump also agrees that the visit could have been low-key, but Pelosi went there to stick the knife in and twist it for China. So I think it was a provocation, and I think Biden knew but didn't or couldn't stop her.
Okay. Dr. Dzodin, at last I want to talk very short about the European Union, politically and in terms of international relations. Yeah? Where's the European Union, which is geographically equidistant from US and China?
It's equidistant, and it should be the bridge and also the mortar solder between the two, because it's well placed, because it has a huge population, because it has a huge economy. The EU, though, it's quite in its infancy still, and so it has some growing to do. And I do believe that it has the problem of tilting more towards America than China. I think because it should be and wants to follow a policy of strategic independence, let's say, that they should be the balance between the two. And I think in time they may well be.
But the European Union can a lot of things do to turning down the temperature.
Yes. Yeah. And I think they should. I think actually, if we get to this tripartite world, of course, there's many other actors, but three main actors, that the three of them should meet more and talk more, because talking is better than saber rattling, and saber rattling is better than fighting.
Mr. Dr. Dzodin, thank you very much for this talk. Very much for this talk. It was really more. It was more than a talk. It was a lecture about the international situation in the best tradition of this house here, the Wiener Urania, where the top place for popular education. And I hope we have a lot of possibilities of encounters in Vienna, Austria. Thank you very much. Danke Ihnen, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, fürs Zuschauen. Danke, bis zum nächsten Mal. Auf Wiedersehen.